pieces I have selected for this series are mainstays of our horn repertoire from the late 18th through to the mid-20th century. Each piece was chosen partially due to it being such a regularly learnt and performed work, but also each piece has given us the opportunity to explore a different type of design of horn in the history of the instrument, as well as looking at aspects of performance practice. With some of these works, there could be a number of contrasting approaches to the choice of instrument. However, for this next piece, I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to play on a totally mind-blowing instrument, an instrument for which the piece in question was specifically written. This piece is Saint-Saëns' Morceau de Concert, written for and premiered by Henri Chaussier in 1891. This work was originally conceived for a very special type of horn designed by Chaucier, and for this performance I am fortunate enough to have been loaned a unique copy of Chaussier's instrument made by the Swiss brass makers Anneke. The original of this instrument, designed by Chaucier and realised by François Millereau in around 1885, belongs to the collection of the Musical Instrument Museum in Brussels. This copy was made by Eggers as part of a major research project headed up by the Hochschule der Künste in Bern about a decade ago, which led to a big conference in 2013 focusing on many aspects of 19th century French brass performance, practice and instrument making, with the Cor Chaussier as its focus. This instrument may at first glance look like a standard piston horn of the 19th or even early 20th century. It has the standard 3 piston valves and a 4th rotary thumb valve. Again, the thumb valve's not that unusual given that makers such as Selmer were building compensating doubles in the early 20th century. At closer inspection, there are some strange things about it, such as the very wide wrap. Unfortunately, this horn doesn't fit into any standard horn case. This horn is non-standard in other ways. It's not crooked, it's pitched in F, which is quite common. The first valve behaves normally and lowers the instrument by a tone into E flat, but the second valve is an ascending valve and raises it by a semitone, making it horn in F sharp. The third valve is another ascending valve, this time by a third, making this horn in A. And the rotary thumb valve is a separate valve rather than one switching between two sides or two systems like on modern or most compensating horns, and lowers the horn by a fourth into C basso. The combination of these 4 valves mean I can play everything from B flat basso, thumb first valve, through to B flat alto, second and third valve. This horn isn't a standard piston horn, but what we would call an omnitonic horn. Omnitonic horns were a feature of the 19th century and are designed not to be necessarily a chromatic instrument like the piston horn, but in fact are natural horns in disguise. This instrument combines all the crooks needed on one natural horn into one piece of kit. I don't have to worry about carrying or even changing the crooks in the case of this type of omnitonic horn. I just choose a different combination of valves and go. One of the unique selling points of such a design was that the instrument can be kept at a stable temperature as there are no separate parts. The crooks aren't waiting to be used and getting cold in the meantime whilst I'm using another one. But omnitonic horns come in all sorts of designs. Some really look like a horn designed by a Hieronymus Bosch or a Heath Robinson. For example, a design from 1815 by Jean-Baptiste Dupont, which must weigh an absolute ton, as he seems to combine all the tubing needed for all the different crooks, but joins them at the beginning of the instrument with a block, and you put the mouthpiece into whichever point it is on the block for whichever crook you need. One of the more elegant solutions to creating an omnitonic horn that I know is the radius horn designed by John Callcott in the mid-19th century, which belongs to the Bake collection in Oxford. This is almost like a spiral horn with a telescopic arm in the middle. You move the telescopic arm a bit like a hand on a clock and plug it into the relevant port in the spiral in order to lengthen or shorten the instrument and pitch it in the appropriate crook. Henri Chaussier was born in 1854 and died in 1914. He studied horn initially in Dijon, then in Paris in the natural horn class of Jean Moore, where he won the Premier Prix in 1880. He became the first horn of the Concerts Cologne, Concerts Guadeloupe and the Société des Concerts du Conservatoire, also travelling outside of France to work in Germany, Holland and Belgium. In 1886, Chaucier published the first edition of his manifesto, Les Notices Expectatives sur le nouveau instrument en ut, in which he outlined his concept of omnitonic instruments, which could be applied to any brass instrument. One of his main ideas was that the instruments would no longer be transposing, but always in concert pitch. Chaucier himself said this idea came from working in Germany in 1882. There, in keeping with local custom, he was obliged to use a valve horn in F, an experience which he described as a painful apprenticeship, due to having to transpose everything into F and not use right-hand technique. Chaucier wasn't against progress, but supported the idea that playing everything on a chromatic horn in F overrode the sensibilities of composers, especially those from earlier eras, who were writing for horns in different crooks, complete with the special colour and character of each crook. This design by Chaucier is often regarded as the last of the omnitonic horns, and his publication shows that the instrument appears to combine both the potential to use it as a natural horn in all the keys, as well as being played as a chromatic piston horn. Chaucier was very evangelical about his design and took many opportunities to promote and defend his ideas. Probably one of the most efficient ways of doing this was to persuade an influential composer to write both about it and for it. In 1885, Saint-Saëns had reworked the fourth movement Romance from his suite for cello and piano into a Romance in E for Chaucier to perform on the natural horn. The following year, Saint-Saëns backed up in print Chaucier's reforming plans to abolish the system of transposing instruments, a system described as Saint-Saëns as a barbaric anomaly designed to disappear with time, in favour of non-transposing wind instruments based in C. In 1891, Chaucier premiered what was initially entitled a fantasy, only later renamed Morceau de Concert, composed for his new horn by Saint-Saëns. The reception was mixed. Many reviewers got the concept of design and commented that the piece included passages for the instruments with hand stopping, as well as instantaneous changes of crook made to demonstrate the extent of the multiple resources of the omnitonic system. When doubt was cast, it was often questioning whether this piece changed the real role of the instrument, pointing to, for example, the virtuosity and the arpeggio sections in the piece, something that would later be central to works such as Ducas's Villanelle, written for the Cor Piston. One review describes the work as a concerto divided into three parts, but goes on to say that Chaucier played the natural horn for the first section, Cor Piston for the middle, and an omnitonic horn for the finale. If we understand that this omnitonic horn is in effect all three instruments in one, perhaps the reviewer had understood the capabilities of the instrument, but not how or where Chaucier was using those capabilities, as it does not map to the music, this explanation. Approaching this work has been really mind-blowing. One of the things that I know from other horn players such as Claude Moret and Uli Hübner, both of whom have studied this work in great depth, with Uli having performed it several times on this very same instrument, is that faced with the capabilities of this instrument and the music written by Saint-Saëns, it's likely that any horn player would make subtly different interpretations as to which technique is relevant to which section. My approach was initially to learn it as a chromatic piece, a Cor Pistons piece. That gave me the opportunity to learn the initially totally counterintuitive fingering. But the more I worked on the piece, the more shortcuts I could see as my natural horn playing brain kicked in. I kept on discovering passages which I realised could be better played as horn in E flat with hand technique or horn in C basso. Sometimes this could be helpful for just a couple of notes, and sometimes for much more lengthy extended passages. All of the other works featured in this series have had a big connection to Dense Brain and his work. However, the Morceau de Concert isn't a work strongly connected to Brain, whilst he certainly had copies of it in his own library. I'm not aware of it having been part of his own repertoire to any great extent, but I thought the interesting perspective offered on the history of our instrument by the existence of this type of omnitonic horn made it worth including this horn and the Morceau de Concert in this series here.